I had just turned 63 when my left knee finally gave out. Not dramatically, not all at once. It had been warning me for months. A dull ache when I climbed the stairs, a sharp protest every time I knelt in the garden. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I had been telling myself that for a long time about a lot of things. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. I remember because I had a pot of oatmeal on the stove and the news was on. Something about the election, voices going back and forth, the kind of noise that fills a quiet house. I reached across the kitchen counter for my reading glasses. My weight shifted wrong and then the floor came up fast. I didn't scream. I'm not sure why. I just lay there on the linoleum with my cheek against the cold and thought, very clearly, this is bad. My phone was on the counter above me. I couldn't reach it. I tried to pull myself up using the cabinet handle, and something in my knee made a sound I will never forget, a grinding wet pop, and I stopped trying. I lay still, and I breathed, and I waited. The oatmeal burned. I could smell it. The news kept talking. I don't know how long I was on that floor before I managed to drag myself 3 feet to the left and reach the dish towel hanging off the oven door, and from there, inch by inch, I got to my phone. 40 minutes, maybe longer. I wasn't counting. The first person I called was my son. His name is Curtis. He's 37, lives about 40 minutes north of me in Naperville, Illinois, where he and his wife bought a house 2 years ago. Nice neighborhood. Good school district, they told me, even though they don't have children yet. He works in corporate finance. He's always been good with numbers. His father was the same way. I called Curtis and it rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called my neighbor Dorothy, who's 71 and sharper than anyone I know, and she answered on the second ring and was at my back door in under 4 minutes. Dorothy called 911. The paramedics came. They took one look at my knee, at the angle of it, at the swelling that had already started, and they put me on a stretcher. In the ambulance, I asked the paramedic, young woman, couldn't have been older than 25. I asked her if someone had reached my son. She looked at her clipboard. We have a number listed. We'll keep trying. They kept trying. At the hospital, a nurse named Frances, older woman, reading glasses on a beaded chain, she told me gently, while I was waiting for the orthopedic surgeon to come in, that they had called Curtis 14 times. 14. His phone was going to voicemail after 2 rings, which meant he was seeing the calls and declining them. I told her to keep trying. They called him 6 more times before I went into surgery. I had a complete tear of the posterior cruciate ligament and a fractured tibial plateau. The surgeon, Dr. Bile Plateau, Okafor, explained it to me carefully. He had kind eyes and spoke slowly, the way doctors do when they're not sure how much the patient is absorbing. I absorbed all of it. I have always been good at absorbing bad news quietly. Is their family coming? He asked. My son is on his way, I said. I don't know why I said that. He hadn't answered. He wasn't on his way. But it felt important in that moment to believe it. Or at least to say it out loud. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was the ceiling tiles. White, those little perforated squares, and I thought, very quietly, Curtis, please. I woke up in a recovery room with Frances sitting 3 feet away, charting something on a tablet. Your son, she said when she saw my eyes open. We've been trying all day. 22 calls total by then. I found out later they'd also emailed the secondary contact I had listed, my sister Pauline, who lives in Phoenix, and Pauline had tried to reach Curtis herself. He didn't answer her either. I asked Frances what time it was. Just after 6, she said. Evening. I had gone in at 11 in the morning. 7 hours. 22 calls. Dorothy came that evening. She sat with me and held my hand and didn't say anything unnecessary, which is one of the things I love most about Dorothy. She brought me a change of clothes and a bag, and she told me my cat, Biscuit, was fine and eating well at her house. I cried a little then. Not about the knee. Not really. Curtis called at 9:47 that night. I know the exact time because Frances was still on shift and I saw her face change when she came to tell me. Your son is on the phone at the nurse's station, she said. I asked her to tell him I was resting and would call him in the morning. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded and went back out. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in that hospital bed with my leg elevated and my hands folded on my stomach, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the sequence of events very carefully, the way you do when you're trying to understand something that doesn't yet make sense. 22 calls over 7 hours. Declining, declining, declining. In the morning I called him back. Mom. His voice was careful, measured. The tone he uses when he already knows there's a problem and is preparing his defense. I was in meetings all day, back to back. I didn't have my personal phone on me. Curtis, I said, the hospital called your office line too, and your wife's number. Silence. Christine didn't tell me until late, he said. She thought it wasn't serious. I let that sit between us for a moment. I had surgery, I said, on my knee. I was on the floor of my kitchen for 40 minutes before Dorothy found me. Mum, I'm sorry, I really am, but you know how things get at work, the quarter's closing and— I know, I said. I'll call you when I'm home. I hung up. I was in the hospital for 3 days and then transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Downers Grove for 2 weeks of physical therapy. It's a clean place, cheerful staff, a sunroom with good light in the afternoons. I did my exercises. I learned to use the walker. I got incrementally better, the way the body does when you give it no choice. Curtis came to visit once during those 2 weeks. He came on a Saturday, stayed for 45 minutes, and spent most of it on his phone in the hallway. He brought flowers, yellow carnations in a plastic sleeve from a gas station, I think, though I didn't say anything. And he told me he was really sorry and that things at work had been insane lately. His wife, Kristen, did not come. My sister Pauline flew in from Phoenix for 4 days. She slept on the fold-out couch at Dorothy's and came every morning, stayed through dinner, helped me practice walking the length of the hallway. Pauline is 68 and has bad shoulders, and she still came every single day. On her last night, we sat in the sunroom after the other patients had gone to bed, and Pauline said very quietly, "You know you don't have to keep making excuses for him." I didn't answer right away. "I know," I said finally. "He's been like this for years, Gloria." There it was. My name said gently, the way a sister says it when she's been waiting a long time to say the thing she's been holding. She was right. She had been right for years. I just hadn't been ready to stop being wrong. Gloria. That's me. I spent 31 years as a middle school English teacher in the Elmhurst School District. I retired 4 years ago. My husband, Robert, died 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. The kind that doesn't give you time to say what you need to say. Curtis was 31 when his father died. He came home for the funeral, stayed a week, and then went back to his life. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's the sequence. It's the pattern I was too close to see clearly for a very long time. After Robert died, I did what I always do. I kept going. I kept the house. I maintained the garden Robert had loved. I volunteered at the library on Tuesday afternoons. I learned to do the things Robert had always handled, the gutters, the taxes, the car maintenance. I figured them out one by one, quietly, without making it a production. I thought I was being strong. I was also, I understand now, making it very easy for my son to not worry about me when Curtis stopped calling regularly. First every Sunday, then twice a month, then when he felt like it, I told myself he was busy. When he and Kristen stopped coming for Thanksgiving 2 years running, I made Thanksgiving for Dorothy and Pauline and told myself it was better anyway. Smaller, easier. When he forgot my birthday last year, not a day late, not a card that got lost, just forgot entirely, I didn't say anything. I was the one who accommodated. I was the one who adjusted. I was the one who made it easy. And I had convinced myself, somewhere along the way, that this was love, that loving someone meant making space for their absence, that a good mother didn't make demands. I was on the rehabilitation center floor, practicing standing from a chair without using my hands, when it occurred to me that I had been practicing the same thing emotionally for the better part of 6 years, standing up without support, without anyone holding out a hand, and calling it fine. I came home in early December. Dorothy had stocked my refrigerator. There was a casserole from my neighbor across the street, Maxine, and a note from the librarian I volunteer with, and a text from my former student Deja, who is 24 now, and somehow still keeps in touch, asking if I needed anything at all. There was a card from Curtis and Kristen. A card. It had a generic autumn landscape on the front. I think it was actually a fall card, not a get-well card, the kind that comes in a multi-pack, and inside Kristen had written in her looping handwriting, "Thinking of you. Get well soon. Love, C&K." Curtis had signed his name. I put it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. Then I called my estate attorney, a woman named Barbara Chen, whom Robert and I had worked with years ago to set up our will and trust documents. I had updated things after Robert died, but hadn't looked at them since. "I want to review everything," I told her. "Soon. Barbara's office is in Oak Park, on a quiet street with big trees." I went the second week of December, when I could drive again, carefully, my left leg still stiff, and I sat across from her and we went through everything. Robert and I had set up a revocable living trust. The house, the investment accounts, the savings, all of it structured to pass to Curtis upon my death, with small bequests to Pauline and to a local literacy non-profit I've supported for years. Standard. What you do for a child you assume will be there. I made changes. I increased Pauline's portion significantly. I designated a larger gift to the literacy organization. I set up a bequest to the rehabilitation center in Downers Grove, not enormous, but real, the kind that matters to a small facility. And I reduced Curtis's share to something I'll call modest. Not nothing, but modest. Barbara did not react, because Barbara is a professional. She asked the questions she was required to ask. Was I doing this voluntarily? Was I in sound mind? Did I understand the implications? And I answered each one clearly. "Do you want to notify him?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, my hands in my lap, looking at the house. Robert's house. My house. Our life, built carefully over decades. I thought about the 22 unanswered calls. I thought about 40 minutes on a kitchen floor. I thought about the gas station flowers. I thought about the forecart. I went inside. Biscuit was at the door. I fed him and put on the kettle and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the yard where the garden would come back in spring, and I felt something I hadn't expected, not relief exactly, not anger, something quieter than either. Clarity. Curtis found out in January. Not from me. I had said nothing, but through a conversation with Pauline that went sideways in the way family conversations do, when one person knows something and another person is fishing. He called me on a Thursday evening. "Mum." His voice was different this time, stripped of the careful, measured quality. "Aunt Pauline said something about, she mentioned you'd been to see an attorney." "I did," I said, "in December. Did you change the trust?" I had thought about how to answer this question for weeks, whether to soften it, frame it, give him room to respond gracefully. I decided against all of that. "Yes," I said, "I did." The silence was long. "Because of the hospital thing." His voice climbed. "Mum, I explained that. I was in back-to-back meetings. You can't punish me for having a demanding job." And there it was. Punish. "Curtis," I said, "the hospital called you 22 times in 7 hours while I was in surgery. You declined every call. I didn't know it was serious. You didn't know because you didn't answer." Kristin said, "I'm not talking about Kristin," I said. "I'm talking about 22 calls. I'm talking about your father's house and 30 years of your life being funded by this family. I'm talking about a birthday you didn't remember and 2 Thanksgivings you chose not to come home for. I'm not punishing you. I'm being accurate." Another silence. Longer. "So that's it," he said. "You're just cutting me out because I had a bad day." I had known this framing was coming. I had prepared for it. But it still landed somewhere in my chest, that word cutting, as if I were the one doing damage. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said. "I'm making decisions about what I worked for and what I want to leave behind. Those are my decisions to make, just like answering a phone is a decision." He hung up. I sat with the phone in my lap for a while. Biscuit jumped up beside me and I put my hand on his back and felt his breathing, slow and even. I thought I might cry. I didn't. He called back 2 days later. His voice was different again, softer, something I hadn't heard in years, maybe since he was in his 20s and still called, just to talk. He said he was sorry. He said he knew he'd been distant. He said the job had been consuming him and his marriage had been difficult, and he knew that wasn't an excuse. He just wanted me to understand. I listened. I listened to all of it. And here is the thing I have learned, slowly, over 63 years and 1 kitchen floor and 22 unanswered calls. Listening is not the same as accepting. I told him I heard him. I told him I was glad he'd called. I told him I loved him because I do. I do love him in the specific, aching, helpless way you love a child you raised, even when that child has become someone you no longer recognize clearly. I told him the trust changes would stand. He was quiet. "I want a relationship with you," I told him. "I would like very much for that to be true going forward. But I spent a long time making myself smaller so you could stay comfortable. I'm not going to do that anymore." "What does that mean, practically?" he asked. And the fact that he asked, the fact that he didn't just hang up again, felt like something. "It means I'll answer when you call," I said. "And I'll expect the same." That was 5 months ago. Curtis has called 11 times since then. Not perfectly. There was a 3-week stretch in March where I didn't hear from him at all. But 11 times, which is more than the previous 18 months combined. He came for Easter. He and Kristen both came. Kristen and I are not close, and I don't expect we will be. But she sat at my table and helped clear the dishes and looked at me without the faint discomfort she used to have, like she was never sure what I wanted from them. Maybe she's figured out I don't want anything from her. I just want them to show up. My knee is mostly healed. I walk without the cane now, though I'm careful on the stairs. I'm back at the library on Tuesday afternoons. The garden came back in spring the way it always does. The black-eyed Susans Robert planted along the fence, the hostas, the climbing rose on the south wall that refuses to stop blooming no matter what happens to the rest of the yard. I look at that rose sometimes and I think about persistence, not the grinding, teeth-clenched kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Pauline is coming to visit in June. We're going to drive up to Wisconsin for a few days, take it slow, stop at whatever we feel like stopping at. I have not done a trip like that in a long time. I'm looking forward to it in a way that feels new, not because it's special, but because I chose it, because I made space for it by not filling that space with waiting for someone else to show up. I don't know what Curtis and I will become. I hope we become more. I am holding that hope gently, the way you hold a convalescent thing, with care but without gripping, because gripping is how you stop the blood flow, and some things need room to heal on their own timeline. What I know is this: I spent a long time measuring my own worth by how much I could absorb without asking for anything back. I called it strength. It wasn't. It was disappearing in slow motion and calling it consideration. I was on that kitchen floor for 40 minutes because I didn't want to be a burden. I almost went into surgery without anyone knowing because I had spent years teaching my son that my emergencies could wait. I am 63 years old. I taught English for 31 years. I have read enough stories to know that the ones that change you are never the dramatic ones. They're not the car accidents or the betrayals or the big confrontations. They're the small accumulations, the quiet moments when something finally stops being bearable and starts being clear. 40 minutes on a cold floor, a phone ringing 22 times into silence. That was my moment. I got up, and I stopped making it easy to be left on the floor. If you are sitting somewhere right now recognizing yourself in any part of this, the accommodating, the shrinking, the making it fine, I want you to hear me say what it took me 63 years to understand. The people who love you will answer the phone, and the people who don't answer the phone are telling you something true. It is not your job to argue with what they're telling you. You are allowed to listen. You are allowed to listen. You are allowed to adjust accordingly. You are allowed to stop waiting on the floor. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who needed to hear it. And if you know someone who does, share it with them. Sometimes we need to hear the thing from a stranger before we can accept it from ourselves. Take care of yourselves. I mean that. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs to keep pretending things are fine when they aren't. Not the dramatic costs. Not the ones you can point to. I mean the slow, quiet cost of adjusting yourself year after year to fit around someone else's absence. That's what I did with my son for a long time. I called it patience. I called it being understanding. I told myself I was the bigger person. But the honest word for it, the one I couldn't say until I was lying on a cold kitchen floor with no one coming, was shrinking. I had been shrinking for years, and I had dressed it up as virtue. What I've come to understand is that there's a difference between being a forgiving person and being a person who forgives things that haven't been acknowledged or changed. The first one takes genuine strength. The second one just looks like strength from the outside, while quietly costing you everything on the inside. I confused them for a long time. I think a lot of us do. Curtis is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier, in some ways, if he were. Bad people are simple. What Curtis is someone who learned very early that I would accommodate him, that I would not press, would not demand, would not make things uncomfortable. And he built his behavior around that knowledge the way water builds its path around whatever doesn't push back. That's not cruelty. That's just cause and effect working exactly the way it's supposed to. And I was the cause. For years I was the cause. When I went to see Barbara and changed the trust, I wasn't punishing him. I want to be honest about that too, because I've asked myself the question enough times to know the answer. I was being accurate. I was finally letting the outside of my life match the inside of it, letting my decisions reflect what I actually knew rather than what I wished were true. There is a kind of integrity in that, I think. Not a proud integrity, a quiet one. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The hard part, the part nobody talks about, is that making honest decisions about your own life can look like hardness from where someone else is standing. Curtis called it punishment. He called it cutting him out. And I sat with that framing for weeks, turning it over, asking myself if he was right. I don't think he was. But I also understand why it felt that way to him. When someone who has always accommodated you finally stops, it feels like aggression. It isn't. It's just the end of a very long habit. What I know now, 5 months on, is this. The moment I stopped making it easy for my son to disappear, he started showing up. Not perfectly, not all the way, but more. And that more is real in a way that the old arrangement never was, because it isn't built on my silence anymore. It's built on something closer to the truth. 63 years, 61 years of teaching other people's children how to think clearly and say what they mean. And it took 40 minutes on a kitchen floor to teach me to do the same for myself. I don't call that wasted time. I call it the price of the lesson. And the lesson, when it finally came, was worth it.